The wind howled through the broken walls of the mining colony on Kelvara 6. A thick orange dust floated in the air, clinging to metal, skin, and breath. The storm had been raging for 3 days now, cutting the colony off from outside support. But for Zara, a single mother of the Telyari species, the storm was not her biggest fear. Her daughter, Luma, was burning with fever in her arms. Zara ran through the metal corridors of the colony, her long, pale blue cloak soaked in rain and dirt. She pushed open the heavy doors of the emergency clinic. The lights inside flickered. Robots buzzed past her without stopping. A tired medical worker looked up from his console and frowned. "Please," Zara begged, her voice shaking. "My daughter, she's burning up. She has core lung fever. Please help her." The worker didn't move. "Telyari cases are low priority. We're over capacity. Take her to your people." Zara's hands trembled. "My people are gone. There's no one left here. Only me and her." The worker looked away. "Then you should have left with them when the last ship departed." Zara stood frozen. Her eyes burned with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She turned and carried Luma back into the storm. Luma whimpered softly, her forehead hot against her mother's chest. Every door she tried was the same. At the local food depot, they shut the gate before she could speak. At the central square, others stared but turned away quickly. Even the ship hangar guards told her to leave. "If you collapse here, we'll have to clean up after you," one muttered. Zara knew her daughter had only hours left. Core lung fever attacked the lungs fast, turning breath into pain and blood. She had heard once, many seasons ago, that humans had a medicine, Stories.X, strong enough to stop the illness. But no human had spoken to her in years. They mostly stayed in their corner of the colony, dealing in supplies, tools, and trade. Zara found a small dry spot near the edge of the old market and sat down, holding her daughter tightly. Luma was barely conscious now. "I'm here," Zara whispered, stroking her daughter's soft cheek. "I'm still here." A shadow fell over her. She looked up. It was a human. A tall man in a dusty black coat, his hair messy and his boots thick with sand. He carried a metal crate in one hand and a small oxygen mask in the other. He blinked at her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice tired but not cruel. Zara hesitated. She didn't expect kindness. "Not anymore. My daughter. She's dying," she said quietly. "She needs Stories.X. Do you know it?" The man crouched beside her, placing the crate down. He looked at Luma, then at Zara. "I've heard of it. It's not used much anymore, only made on Earth." He looked around. The storm made the air thick and loud, but no one else paid them any attention. "I had some months ago," he continued. "Might be leftovers in an old drop pod we lost north of here, but it's in the Badlands. No one goes there during a storm." Zara nodded. "Then, it is the end." The man shook his head. "No, not if I can find it in time." Zara's eyes widened. "Why would you help me?" "No one else did." The man looked away for a second. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "Because someone once helped me when no one else would, and I failed to save my daughter. I don't want to see that happen again." He stood and pulled out a small tracker. "My name's Ryan. Stay here. Keep her warm. I'll be back." Before Zara could reply, he was already walking into the storm, the wind beating against his coat. She watched him go until he vanished into the dust. Zara looked down at her daughter. Luma's breathing was shallow, but her small fingers twitched, weakly. The mother wrapped her tighter in her arms, shielding her from the cold. No one had helped her. Not until this human, Ryan, had stopped. Zara didn't know if he would come back. But for the first time in days, a tiny spark of hope lit inside her. She whispered to her daughter again, voice trembling but calm. "We wait, little one, just a bit longer." The wind outside screamed like an angry beast, throwing sand against broken walls and old steel doors. Ryan adjusted the strap on his pack and pulled his mask tighter. The storm had grown worse, but he didn't stop. He knew where the old pod was, at least he hoped so. Months ago, he had helped unload supplies from Earth, including a batch of unused medicine. Some crates had been lost when a transport shuttle crashed just beyond the colony border. Most people didn't bother going back for them. Too dangerous, too far, and no one cared enough. But now, it mattered. Ryan pushed forward, his boots sinking slightly into soft ground where the outer wall ended. He passed a warning sign that blinked weakly in the storm. Rad zone, limited entry. Most of the radiation had faded years ago, but the fear remained. He looked back once. The colony was already hidden behind the swirling storm. There was no going back now, not without the medicine. Inside the old market shelter, Jera sat against the cold wall, her daughter's head resting in her lap. She had wrapped Luma in both her cloak and her arms. The girl's breathing was slower now, and her skin looked pale with faint purple marks along her neck. Jera kept whispering soft words, not sure if her daughter could even hear her. "You must hold on. A human went to find help. He said he would return." She thought about what the others had done, how they turned away. She thought about the way her people had once been proud and strong, before war and relocation broke their world apart. Now they were scattered, treated like shadows, like ghosts no one wanted to see. And yet, one human had stopped. Not to judge, not to question. He just listened and acted. "Come back soon," she whispered to the storm, hoping Ryan could hear it somehow. Ryan climbed a slope of broken rocks. The pod had landed near this ridge. He remembered it because he had been on the rescue crew. They never recovered everything. He had argued back then that some of the boxes were important, but his boss had told him, "Nothing in there's worth risking a man's life. Leave it." Now, it might be worth a child's life. He reached the eel top and looked down. Half buried in the dirt and metal debris, the old pod lay sideways. One side was crushed, but the back hatch still looked sealed. Ryan slid down and approached it carefully. His hands trembled a little as he pulled out a small tool from his belt and started working on the hatch lock. The cold metal resisted. The sand had clogged the edges. The power was long dead. Ryan gritted his teeth and pushed harder. After several minutes of struggling, the lock finally gave a loud click, and the hatch creaked open just enough for him to squeeze through. Inside, it was dark, silent, and dusty. He turned on his small wrist light and looked around. There were crates, some broken, some untouched. He opened the first few quickly. Food packs, filters, wires. Finally, in the fourth crate, he saw what he needed. Silver containers with a red symbol. Respiron X. There were 6 sealed vials, enough for maybe 3 full treatments. He took all 6 and placed them carefully in his inner coat pocket, then turned and crawled out of the pod. The wind was stronger now. The storm had shifted direction and dust began to fill the air like smoke. Ryan pulled his coat tight, wrapped a cloth around his face, and began the walk back. Back at the colony, Jera heard footsteps approaching. She looked up quickly, heart racing. It was a patrol robot. It paused nearby, scanned her and Luma, then beeped and rolled away without saying a word. Jera lowered her eyes. She could feel her daughter's breath fading. Luma didn't even stir now. She feared the time was nearly up. Then she thought she heard something else, something real. Footsteps, heavy, slow, dragging. She stood up and turned toward the sound. Through the storm, a figure appeared. Ryan. He was limping, his coat torn at one side, his mask cracked and half covered in dirt. But he was holding something tightly in both hands. Jera ran toward him as fast as she could without dropping Luma. When she reached him, Ryan collapsed to one knee, breathing hard. He pulled the vials from his pocket and held them out. "I got it," he said, his voice weak but clear. Jera took them gently, eyes wide with disbelief. "You came back. You really came back?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Told you I would." She didn't waste time. She picked up Luma and rushed into the emergency building again, pushing past robots and workers. One of the medical officers, surprised by her shouting, finally responded after seeing the label on the vial. "Respiron X?" he said. "Where? Did you get this?" Jera didn't answer. "Please, just save her." Outside, Rayan sat on the ground back against the cold wall. Rain started to fall softly. He closed his eyes and let the water wash the dust off his face. He didn't know if the medicine would work. He didn't know if he had made it in time. But he had done what no one else had tried. He had cared. And sometimes, that was enough. Rayan sat outside the clinic, still catching his breath. His body ached from the long walk through the storm. His legs were tired, his fingers numb, and there was a sharp pain in his side from where he had slipped on the rocks. But none of that mattered now. He had done his part. Inside, the doctors moved quickly. They gave the first dose of Respiron X to Luma and connected her to oxygen support. Jera stood near the bed, her hands tightly gripping her daughter's fingers. The machine beeped. Luma's heartbeat was weak, but steady. One of the nurses, AI, human woman, looked surprised. "It's working," she said. "Her fever is dropping. This stuff really works." Jera's eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of hope. For the first time in many days, her daughter looked peaceful. Rayan leaned against the cold metal wall, watching the sky slowly clear as the storm began to calm. Drops of rain tapped gently on the roof. His thoughts drifted back to Earth, back to Ayla, his own daughter. She had been just a little older than Luma when she fell sick. But Earth's doctors couldn't save her. It was a different illness, something fast and rare, but the pain was the same. Rayan had held her hand until the end, watching her slip away. That day he promised himself something. If I ever have the chance to save someone else's child, I won't fail again. That's why he had helped Jera, not because he was a hero or stronger than others, but because he knew the pain of watching someone you love disappear, breath by breath. He had already lived that nightmare once. He didn't want anyone else to go through it. An hour later, the clinic door opened. Jera stepped out, wrapped in a clean sheet. Her face was still wet from tears, but she looked different now, stronger, steadier. She walked up to Rayan and sat beside him without a word. The silence between them said more than speaking ever could. Finally, Jera broke it. "They said she will live. If she gets the second and third doses, she'll recover fully." Rayan nodded slowly. "Good. She's strong, like her mother." Jera smiled faintly and looked up at the sky. The clouds had started to break. A bit of sunlight touched the edge of the colony's towers. "No one else came to help," she whispered. "Not even my own people." Rayan looked down. "Most people, they get used to ignoring what doesn't affect them." Jera nodded. "But you didn't." Rayan shrugged. "I just did what was right." "No," Jera said. "You did what was brave. That's not the same thing." They both sat quietly for a while, watching the rain ease. Elsewhere in the colony, the story had already started to spread. People whispered about the human who had gone into the wasteland for an alien child. Some thought he was crazy. Others thought he had done something incredible. In the trade center, a merchant asked, "Would you have done that for a stranger?" His friend replied, "Not during a storm like that, not for someone we don't even know." In the officer's lounge, one guard shook his head. "He could have died out there." Another said, "Maybe he reminded us what we stopped caring about." The next day, Luma opened her eyes. She was weak but breathing normally. Her fever was gone. Her lungs were healing. Jera held her hand and smiled. "You're safe now, little star." Luma looked around the room. "Where's the man who saved me?" Jera kissed her forehead. "He's resting. He walked through the storm just to bring you medicine. You owe your life to him." The little girl blinked. "I want to thank him." That afternoon, Jera returned to Rayan's small room near the dock storage units. It was a simple place with just a bed, a desk, and a few broken tools scattered around. Ryan sat on the edge of his bed, wrapping his side with a bandage. When he looked up and saw Jera at the door, he smiled gently. "How's she doing?" Jera stepped inside. "She's asking for you." Ryan's eyes softened. "She is?" Jera nodded. "She wants to thank you. And I do too. Not just for the medicine, but for reminding me that not all hearts are cold." She held out a small item, handmade. It was a necklace, simple but beautiful, made of woven metal strands and a single polished stone in the center. Ryan took it slowly. "What's this?" "A Teliari blessing stone," Jera said. "In our old homes we gave it to those who protected us." Ryan stared at the stone. "I don't deserve this." "You do," Jera said softly, "because you chose to walk a road that no one else would." Outside, the colony was changing. The word was out. Some were questioning their rules. Others were rethinking their behavior toward alien families like Zera's. But one thing was certain. Everyone now knew the name of the human who went into the storm, not for glory, not for reward, but to save a single child. And sometimes, that was enough to begin a new story. The morning air on Kelvara 6 was quiet for the first time in days. The storm had passed. Dust settled slowly across the colony's metal walls, and the sky above showed a soft, pale blue, something rare on this weather-beaten planet. Inside the clinic, Luma was sitting up. Her eyes were open, and her small fingers played with the edge of the blanket covering her. Her breathing was still a bit slow, but the pain was gone. The machines beeped gently beside her. Jera sat next to the bed, holding a spoon with warm soup. "Just a little more," she said softly. "You need your strength." Luma gave a small smile and took a sip. "Mama, I dreamed of a man. He was in the storm, walking with fire behind him. He held the stars in his hand." Jera smiled, brushing Luma's hair gently. "That wasn't a dream, little one. That man was real. He brought you back from the storm." Not far from the clinic, Ryan sat outside his small home, fixing a broken comm device with shaky hands. He had bandages around his ribs and a small bruise under his eye, but he was healing. The necklace Jera had given him hung from a hook on the wall. He wasn't used to gifts. Most of his life had been about surviving, doing his job and staying out of trouble. He had traveled between colonies, fixing engines, moving supplies, and avoiding attention. But something had changed in him now. He hadn't expected it. When he first saw Jera in the street holding her sick daughter, he could have walked away. Others did. It would have been easier, safer, but he didn't. And now, something inside him felt lighter. A soft knock came at his door. He opened it and found Jera standing there, holding Luma's hand. Luma smiled brightly and took a step forward. "Uncle Ryan," she said happily. Ryan blinked, surprised. "Uncle?" Jera laughed gently. "She's decided that anyone who saves her life must be family now." Ryan crouched and smiled at the little girl. "Well then, it's good to see you standing." "I brought you something," Luma said, holding out a small folded cloth. Ryan opened it and saw a simple drawing made with colored dust and water. It showed 3 people, Jera, Luma, and himself, standing under a bright sun. Ryan looked at Jera. "She made this?" "She wanted to thank you in her own way," Jera said. Ryan placed the drawing on the table carefully. "It's the best thing I've been given in years." Later that day, news about what happened spread across the colony. Someone had taken a picture of Ryan returning from the storm, holding the vials of Respiron X in his hands. The image had reached several colony networks. A few days ago, Ryan was just a quiet supply runner. Now people looked at him differently. Some whispered, "That's the man who saved the alien child." Others said, "A human did what none of us dared." At the Central Council Hall, the colony leaders met in private. "We can't ignore what happened," one of them said. "Do we really want humans seen as the only ones who show kindness?" Another replied. Public pressure is rising. They want changes. They want emergency care made equal. After much debate, they agreed to update the medical policy. From now on, all species in the colony would receive help without delay. A small step, but an important one, and it all began because of one man and one act of kindness. Later that evening, Jera returned to Rayan's home again, this time with an idea. "You should come with us," she said. "Back to the Northern District. There's a new outreach center being built. They need someone like you." Rayan looked at her, confused. "Me? I'm not a doctor." "No," Jera said. "But you care. That's rarer than skill." He thought about it. He had never stayed in one place too long. But maybe, just this. Once he could try. "I'll think about it," he said. Jera smiled. "That's enough for now." That night, Rayan walked to the clinic one last time. He stood at the window and saw Luma sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling with ease. He felt something in his chest, something warm. Not pride, not fame, just peace. He had helped save a life, and maybe in doing so had saved something inside himself too. The next morning, as the sun rose again over Kelvara 6, a small group of people gathered at the clinic. Humans, aliens, traders, and workers, all holding small lights in silence. Jera stepped forward and said, "This light is for those who care, who don't look away, who walk into storms when others turn back." She turned to Rayan and handed him one of the lights. He didn't speak, he just held it high and the colony and followed. Days passed. The colony of Kelvara 6, once a place where no one cared, had started to change. The story of a human who risked his life for an alien child had spread far beyond the dusty walls and narrow alleys. People now talked with new words like compassion, unity, and hope. Rayan had become a quiet symbol of that change, though he never asked for attention. He didn't want medals. He didn't want his face on a screen. He only wanted to make sure Luma was safe, and she was. In the warm sunlight of a rare clear day, Rayan stood near the new community health center under construction. It was simple, just a few clean rooms, a water station, and solar power. But it was more than Jera had ever dreamed of for her people. She walked beside Rayan, looking at the building with quiet pride. Luma ran ahead, laughing, her strength fully returned. "Do you believe it?" Jera asked softly. "A few weeks ago I thought my daughter wouldn't live another night. Now she's running like the storm never touched her." Rayan smiled. "She's strong. Maybe stronger than anyone here." Jera turned to him. "So are you." Rayan shook his head. "I just did what I wish someone had done for me. That's not strength. That's memory." Jera paused for a moment, then nodded. "Memory is powerful, especially when it leads to action." Inside the Colony Council building, leaders reviewed new rules they had agreed upon. No species would be turned away from medical help. Supply runs would include medicine for all known illnesses, human or alien. Outreach workers would be trained to listen first, judge never. One of the younger council members spoke up. "It took a storm, a dying child, and one human who dared to care, but we got here." Another replied, "Let's make sure no one forgets how." That evening, Jera invited Rayan to her home. It was small but warm, decorated with soft lights, hand-woven blankets, and gentle music from her homeworld. Luma danced around with joy, showing Rayan a bracelet she had made from old beads and wire. "This is for you," she said, placing it around his wrist. "So you don't forget me." Rayan chuckled. "I won't. I couldn't, even if I tried." Jera served them a hot meal, and they sat around the low table. "I've been thinking," Rayan said slowly. "I never stayed in one place very long, always jumping from one colony to another, running from the past maybe." Jera looked at him kindly. "But not anymore?" He nodded. "No, not anymore. I want to stay, help here, if you'll have me." Jera smiled. "We already do." Later that night, a small ceremony was held in the colony's public square. There was no stage, no fireworks, just people gathered not to celebrate power, but to honor kindness. A council elder spoke. Not all heroes wear uniforms. Some carry medicine through storms. Some listen when others turn away. Tonight we thank one such soul. They called Ryan forward. At first he didn't move, but Jera touched his arm gently, and he stepped ahead. The crowd clapped softly. It wasn't loud, but it was sincere. Ryan stood still, holding the small light they gave him. I'm no leader, he said, and I didn't do anything special. I just saw a child in need, and I remembered what it felt like to lose someone. He looked out, over the crowd. You all have that power too. To see, to feel, to help. We don't need storms to remind us of that, we just need to care. The people nodded. Some wiped their eyes. As the stars lit the sky, Luma sat on her mother's lap watching Rayan talk with others. Mama, she whispered, is he really going to stay here forever? Jera kissed her forehead. As long as he wants to, and maybe longer. Luma yawned, smiling. I'm glad. He makes me feel safe. Jera looked at Rayan, this human who had once been a stranger, now a part of their lives, and deep in her heart she knew something important. Sometimes, the strongest, medicine isn't made in a lab. Sometimes it's kindness, courage, and the simple choice to care. Far beyond Kelvara 6 on other colonies in distant worlds, people read the story of the man who saved a child not of his own kind. They didn't remember every word, but they remembered the feeling. And in quiet corners of space, others began to choose differently. They stopped. They listened. They helped. And little by little, the galaxy changed.